Ooh, it happened on a Saturday morning. The kind of cold that slices through bone. The porch boards were glazed with thin ice, invisible unless you looked from the side, which I didn't. One misstep and my hip met the wood with a crack I still feel days later. I lay there, breath steaming, cheek pressed against the porch rail. Pain bloomed fast. My phone had fallen somewhere beside me, but I couldn't twist to find it. A neighbor, thank God for Carol, heard me call out and ran over, robe flying, phone already dialing 911. They came fast, EMTs in navy coats, boots crunching on frost. One knelt beside me, asked my name, birth date, pain level. I tried to joke, tried to stay pleasant. But it hit me when I was inside the ambulance. We're trying to reach your emergency contact. The younger one said, phone to his ear. Landon Cordero? I nodded. My son. My only son. He frowned. It went straight to voicemail. We'll try again. A minute passed. Then another. Finally, he shook his head and muttered, blocked. Blocked. That's when I knew. They took me to Flagstaff Medical. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me like angry bees. Nurses moved around efficiently. Vitals, X-rays, painkillers. Someone tucked a warm blanket over my legs. I lay there 69 years old alone in a hospital bed with a fractured hip and no one coming. To pass the time, I scrolled my phone. Habit mostly, that's when I saw it. A story from Trina, my daughter-in-law, married to my son, Landon. She had posted a boomerang from their Scottsdale kitchen, wine glasses clinking. Candles lit, music playing. Landon in the background, laughing. Text overlaid in pink cursive. Finally, a drama-free weekend. I watched it 3 times. At first I didn't understand. Then I read it again. Drama-free. I was the drama. I was lying in a hospital with a broken hip, and my family was celebrating my absence. I didn't cry. Not then. I stared at the screen until it blurred. My chest felt tight, not from the injury, but from something deeper. A kind of grief that has no ceremony. The grief of being erased. The nurse returned. Would you like us to call your son again? No, I said quietly. I turned off the phone. When they discharged me 6 hours later, I took a cab home. Carol had shoveled the walkway. A thermos of soup waited on my porch with a note. Knock if you need anything. Seek. I sat in the living room for a long time, still in my coat, hands stiff. The framed photo of Tom on the mantel caught the sunlight. His smile frozen in time from 1998. That trip to Red Rock. He was holding my hand in the picture, pointing at something I can't remember now. I remember what he used to say when work got hard, or the district cut art funding again. Start with what you do control. I looked around. The house was quiet, too quiet. And then I made a call I hadn't made in over a decade. Barbara, it's Marilyn Cordero. You still handling private listings in Flagstaff? A beat, then a warm, familiar voice, Marilyn. I was wondering when you'd call. The house hadn't always been this quiet. There was a time when every room hummed with life, oil paints and turpentine in the back studio. Tom's music drifting from the kitchen radio. Always some 70s folk band, always just a little too loud. Back then, silence was a rare thing. And when it did arrive, it was companionable. I sat at the oak kitchen table, still in my heavy coat from the hospital. My hip throbbed. The ceramic mug between my hands had gone cold, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Outside the bay window, snow clung to the trees. The wind chattered the shutters. But inside, it was still, too still. There's a photograph above the sink hung with painter's tape. Tom and I, 1983, the day we signed the deed to this place. I had marker on my cheek from grading, and he had drywall dust in his hair. We looked so proud, so exhausted, so completely ours. He built the front deck with his own hands. Hauled reclaimed wood from a friend's salvage yard. Said he wanted the grain to show. Said the knots gave it character. I remember staining those boards in the early spring sun, our knees stiff from crouching, laughing because the dog kept stepping in the wet varnish. We didn't have much money, but we had time and love. The kind that doesn't make big gestures, the kind that leaves soup on the stove and puts gas in your car without saying a word. When he died in 2019, it was sudden. A fall on a ski trip we almost didn't take. He'd been stubborn about it, said he didn't want to miss the snow that year. I had sketched him at the lodge while he read. I still have the drawing, pencil on thick stalk smudged at the edges. The loss hollowed out the house. But I stayed, because it was ours. Because his handprint, literal and emotional, is on every corner. And because I thought maybe Landon would still visit. Maybe the grandkid would want to see Grandma's garden, sleep in the bunk Tom built. That lasted a year. Then the comments started. You shouldn't be out here alone. Mom? Have you thought about downsizing? It's too much upkeep. But what they really meant was this house would serve us better. I'd seen the way Trina looked at the kitchen. That performative nod of approval. She said it reminded her of a Nancy Meyers movie. Said it with her phone angled just right to catch the lighting. When they stayed over that Thanksgiving, the last one they attended, she spent more time filming the table than setting it. I watched her post a reel while I basted the turkey. Not a single tag. It was Tom who made sure my name was on every document. Not because he distrusted Landon, but because he'd seen what happened to his Aunt Rose. Her sons had moved in, then sold the place out from under her. She spent her last years in a facility that smelled like bleach and loneliness. Tom called it a failed safe. So when we refinanced the house in 2002 to build the studio addition, he had the LC formed in my name. A small, dusty file of documents sits in the downstairs closet. I hadn't looked at it in years, but now I remembered every page, every signature, every clause. It's not just a house. It's a record of who we were. A quiet legacy wrapped in drywall and weathered paint. And the people who were supposed to carry that forward. Our son, his wife. They didn't just forget it. They dismissed it. They called me dramatic. The radiator hissed behind me. Somewhere upstairs, an old floorboard popped. I blinked away the damp in my eyes and stood. Slow, painful, but determined. It was time. Time to go downstairs. Time to open that file. The first time Trina called me a burden, she didn't use the word directly. She said it with her tone. With the way she passed the gravy at Christmas dinner without looking up. With the way she sighed when I asked if Lyle could stay a few extra days over the break. We'd just have a lot going on, she said, eyes on her phone. You know how it is? Actually, I didn't. Tom and I used to rearrange our lives for Landon without thinking twice. Band recitals, fevers at midnight, last-minute science projects. We never called it inconvenient. We called it parenting. But Trina parented with boundaries, with hashtags, with curated moments. The real moment came weeks later. February still clung to the windows like frostbite. I had made the drive to Scottsdale, against better judgment, to deliver Lyle's sketchbook. He'd left it behind, and the teacher said his project wouldn't count without it. I showed up at their door just after 4 p.m. Trina opened it with a frozen smile. You didn't call?
I didn't want to bother you,
I said. But Lyle's art class. Is that soccer? The silence stretched. I offered the sketchbook. She took it like it was contagious. You really should text first, she said, voice low. It's just a lot to manage when you show up. There it was. I stood there in the doorway, coat still zipped, smelling the rosemary from her crock-pot. Behind her, the house gleamed with carefully chosen neutrals, framed quotes on the wall: gratitude, mindfulness, protect your peace. Not a single photo of us. I won't stay, I said. That's best. Lyle needs routine. On the way out, I noticed something odd. The family photo from 3 Thanksgivings ago, the one I had printed, framed, and given them myself, was gone from the entryway shelf. In its place, a ceramic candle labeled, clean slate. I wish I could say I was shocked. I wasn't. Not entirely. A few days later, Landon called, not to apologize, to suggest I take a step back and let them handle things their way. Mom, you know how she is? Trina gets overwhelmed. She just wants a little space. Space from what? He hesitated. From the pressure. From expectations. I felt heat rise in my neck. I brought a sketchbook. That's not pressure. It's more than that. You show up. You bring memories. You bring guilt. Guilt. She says you make her feel like she's not enough. That you're always watching. I almost laughed. I'm not watching, Landon. I'm surviving. He didn't answer. After that call, I went to the guest room. That's where I keep the family photo wall, or used to. I stood in front of it for a long time. There was our wedding picture. Landon's graduation. A candid of Tom dancing with Lyle when he was 3. And then there was the big one, Thanksgiving 2019. Everyone was there. I remembered how hard I worked on that table, the hand-lettered place cards, the cornucopia I made from wire and burlap. Trina had smiled, had even said thank you. But now I looked closer, and I could see it. She had sat 1 inch further from me than everyone else. Her hand wasn't resting on Landon's. It was gripping his arm. I pulled the photo from the wall. The nail scraped slightly against the frame. I dusted the glass with my sleeve. Then I placed it face down in the drawer. Later that week, Carol stopped by with groceries. She caught me staring at the now blank wall. "Rearranging?" she asked. "Just editing." She gave me a look, the kind only old friends give. The kind that doesn't ask questions but knows every answer. That night I made tea and sat at the kitchen table. The chair across from me felt too empty. I picked up Tom's old Polaroid, the one with the smudge on the lens that made every photo look like it was taken in fog. I snapped a picture of the blank wall. It developed slowly. Ghost-like, it looked honest. At 11:12 p.m., I opened my notebook. Not the usual one with my shopping lists and recipes. The green one, the one with tabs and paper clips. The one labeled Property LLC Transfer Records. I ran my hand over the cover. It smelled faintly of ink and dust. "If they want space," I said aloud, to no one, "let's give them what they asked for." It started with a laminated folder. Trina brought it with her during a rare visit in March, claiming she just wanted to help Mom feel secure. "It's just a property upkeep agreement," she said, placing the folder on my kitchen table like it was nothing more than a coupon book. "Legal stuff. We're thinking ahead. You know, in case of snow damage or plumbing, Landon says this helps with insurance." The way she said, "What?" like it was already decided. She smiled, too wide. "You just need to sign here, initial there. It's super basic." I didn't open it right away. Instead, I studied her. The fresh manicure, the glossy tote bag slung over her chair, her phone buzzing against her thigh with a silent rhythm. Trina was never still for long. Her peace was performative, but her control was surgical. I reached for the folder slowly. "Do you mind if I review it overnight?" I asked, voice calm. She blinked. Just once. Then the smile snapped back in place. "Of course. Take your time. It's not urgent." But she left in a hurry. That night I read every word. The document wasn't just about upkeep. Buried in page 4 was a clause about asset transfer consent for necessary third-party financial coordination. Another on page 6 referred to temporary co-management authority in the event of owner incapacitation. I reread those lines 5 times. My tea went cold again. At 30:17 a.m., I walked to the fireproof box in the hall closet. It took effort to kneel, effort to lift the lid. Inside were the documents Tom and I signed in 2006 when we set up a joint savings account strictly for family legacy. For Lyle's education, we thought. For future grandchildren. For whatever came next. I remembered the bank, Juniper Credit Union, corner of Birch and Willow. I called the next morning, pretended I needed a new statement mailed. "Just reviewing some records," I said lightly. 3 days later, the envelope arrived, cream-colored. Thin. I opened it at the table, same as always. I didn't even think I was nervous. Until I saw the balance. It was missing $48,200. My breath caught. I flipped to the transaction page. 3 withdrawals over the past year, 15 $15,000. Consultancy, home optimization services. The 22,500. Retreat planning, family stabilization. Do 10,700. Social media content infrastructure upgrade. The notes in parentheses read like satire. The account required dual signatures. At least, that's how we'd left it. But somewhere in 2022, a document had changed that. There was a scan of an amendment, signed by me. Only it wasn't. The signature was close, too close. But I knew my own loops and angles. This one was a practiced mimicry. I set the paper down. Carefully. Then I walked to the kitchen sink and threw up. Not from fear. From rage. I stayed there gripping the counter until my breath evened. I stared at the window. Snow was melting now, dripping in lazy rivulets from the eaves. Spring would come whether I was ready or not. When I finally sat down again, I picked up the pen Trina had left beside the folder. Pink monogrammed. I crossed out my name on every page. Then I opened my laptop. It took 3 clicks to find the local attorney Tom had once recommended. A woman named Shelby who specialized in elder estate protection. I sent one line, "I need to revoke access and audit shared accounts." Quietly, she responded within the hour. That afternoon, I drove to Juniper Credit Union myself, with my cane, with my notebook, with a folder full of original documents. I met with the branch manager in a room that smelled of citrus polish and toner. She reviewed everything. Her lips thinned. She nodded more than once. "We'll initiate a forensic review," she said, "and freeze the account immediately." "I want new authorization protocols," I said. "Understood." Back home, I sat on the edge of the couch, bank statement spread in front of me. The numbers blurred. I blinked hard. How did I not see it sooner? They had been chipping away at me for years. First with absence, then with dismissal, then with sweet smiles wrapped around legal poison. This wasn't just insult anymore. This was theft. I turned the paper over. On the back was the bank's watermark, an old juniper tree, barely visible. I traced it with my thumb. Then I whispered to the room, "You want access? Here's your answer." Silence has weight. That was something I learned slowly, across the course of 3 spring weeks. Not from a book, not from one grand incident, but from the steady erosion of sound of contact of presence. No texts, no calls, not even from Lyle. It began with a group message I was suddenly not part of, Easter weekend plans. Brunch, photos, smiling faces around a table where I once sat. I saw it on Trena's story, just like everything else these days, blessed and balanced. She wrote under the image. But the table had 12 chairs, and none saved for me. I waited 2 days before calling Landon. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, everything okay? Just wondering if you were planning something for Easter. I saw some photos, looked lovely." A pause. "Yeah, it was kind of last minute. Just a small thing. We figured with your hip still healing, you might prefer quiet?" I wasn't asked. "We didn't want to pressure you." The word pressed harder than he realized.
I see,
I said. "Thanks for letting me know." He exhaled. "Trina just thinks Lyle's a bit overstimulated lately. We're trying to reduce the emotional variables." Meaning, it might be better if we gave him some space. Just for now. There it was again. Space? As if my presence were a pollutant. As if my love were noise. That night, I wandered the house like a ghost, dusting photos that hadn't been touched, straightening a placemat that had never moved. I opened the piano even though I hadn't played it in years, pressed a single note. The sound echoed too long. The next day, I rearranged the pantry, lined the cans by expiration date, cleaned the grout in the laundry room with a toothbrush. Time passed without dialogue. Until Thursday night, 9:42 p.m. my phone buzzed. Block number. I hesitated, then picked up.
Grandma Lyle?
His voice was hushed. I used Dad's old iPad. "It still has FaceTime." My breath caught. "Sweetheart." He held up a picture he drew, a crayon sketch of the cabin I took him to last year. The pine trees crooked. The sun a thick yellow blob, my old Subaru in the corner. "I miss you." I blinked fast. "I miss you too." Mom says I'm too sensitive, but I know something's wrong. She doesn't let me talk about you. I kept my voice level. "You didn't do anything wrong." He leaned close to the screen. "Are you mad at Daddy?" My throat burned. "No. Just disappointed. Sometimes grown-ups forget how to listen." He nodded slowly, then whispered, "I think I won't forget. We didn't talk long. Just 10 minutes." He ended the call by blowing a kiss. Afterward, I sat in the dark for a while, holding the phone like it was glass. Then I opened the drawer beside the couch, took out the shoebox labeled Lyle, inside ticket stubs, art class flyers, a pine cone from our first hike, and a card he made last Christmas. On the front, "To Grandma who makes the best pancakes." Inside, "I love you because you remember all the things other people forget." I pressed the card to my chest. The tears came quiet. Not from pain, but from the sharp ache of being invisible in a family you helped build. I should have known something was off when I saw the chairs. The invitation had arrived on thick cardstock, pastel florals, gold foil, Mother's Day garden brunch hosted with love by Trina and Landon. It felt like a peace offering. A thaw. I spent a whole afternoon deciding which dress to wear, the one with the embroidered collar Tom loved. I even ironed it. I bought lemon bars from that bakery downtown, The one Trina used to praise when she still spoke to me with warmth. The brunch was held at a vineyard just outside of town, rented for the day. Rows of white chairs under linen canopies, flowers in mason jars, gold balloons spelling out MOM. I arrived 5 minutes early. Trina greeted me with a smile so polished it nearly squeaked. "Oh, Marilyn, you came. You look well." I nodded. "Thanks for inviting me." "Of course. We wanted to honor all the moms who made us who we are." She led me through the space, chattering, then stopped. "Right over here," she said, gesturing. It was a folding table, near the catering bins, not under the canopy. No place card, no floral arrangement, just one napkin half folded, and a chair with uneven legs. I blinked. "I thought—" She waved a hand. "The main table's a bit full, but I figured you like it quieter." "Less stimulation?" My chest tightened. I looked at the long centerpiece table under the canopy. Landon was there, laughing with Trina's mother. Guests I didn't recognize sipped rosé from etched glasses. A place card read Grandma Donna in calligraphy. "That wasn't me." "It's not a big deal," Trina said softly. "Some folks just do better a little aside." I sat. The chair wobbled. Behind me, the smell of warming trays, cheese, ham, garlic. A breeze carried the scent of fertilizer from the vineyard rose. No one came to sit with me. Every few minutes, someone would glance over, then look away. I nibbled at a fruit tart that was more crust than filling. My tea cooled faster than I could drink it. Then I saw him, a familiar face approaching slowly, tall, gray, sharp eyes behind dark glasses. "Harold Jenkins," he said, offering a hand. "Tom's old friend from the city council." "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured, scanning the table setup. "They got you on the auxiliary squad, huh?" I tried to laugh. It came out flat. Don't take this the wrong way, Marilyn, but what the hell are they thinking? Before I could answer, Trina appeared behind him. "Oh, Harold! So glad you made it. Would you mind moving over to the main table? We had you on the list there." He didn't move. "Actually," he said slowly, "I was enjoying the company right here." Her smile cracked. "Of course. You're free to sit where you like." Then, louder, she added, "Would just thought Marilyn preferred peace." Several heads turned. I looked down at my plate. Harold glanced at me, then said clearly, "Funny?" I remember her loving laughter, parties and dancing barefoot in the rain. That earned a laugh from the next table. Trina turned scarlet. Harold leaned in. "You good?" I met his eyes. Something in me settled. I stood slowly, straightened my collar. Then, with every eye on me, I walked over to the main table. Trina watched, frozen. I picked up the name card for Grandma Donna, held it a moment. Then, softly, I said, "Tell Donna I said thank you for the seat. I'll try not to spill anything." And I sat down. Silence followed. A fork clinked. A cough. Then the room shifted, because I was no longer where they had placed me. I was where I chose to be. The attic was warmer than I remembered. Dust danced in the late morning light that slipped through the single window. I hadn't come up here in years, not since the summer Tom passed. The boxes were mostly his, labeled in his neat, square handwriting: insurance, deeds, cabin, utilities, 2005-2019. I had told myself I was only cleaning, but I knew better. Something had shifted in me after the brunch. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. I opened the box labeled Cabin House titles. Inside were folders stacked in reverse chronological order. Receipts, inspection reports, an envelope from our old real estate agent, yellowed at the edges. Near the bottom, I found a maroon folder labeled Simply Transfer. I opened it slowly. Inside, a notarized deed dated August 2, 2017, transfer of property title 215 Juniper Lane and 104 Cabin Creek Road to Juniper Hearth LLC, sole member Marilyn J. Cordero.
I stared.
Juniper Hearth LLC, my name. The signature was Tom's, clear, strong, notarized with a seal from the county office. I had never seen it before, or maybe I had, and filed it away in the fog of grief. I sat back on the floor. The beams above me creaked as the house settled. I could hear birds outside, a dog barking 3 houses down. I was the legal owner of everything, sole member. Trina and Landon had no claim, no stake, no right, and they didn't know. That thought struck cold and deep. I turned the page. Attached was a printed email from Tom to our lawyer at the time. "She doesn't know I'm doing this yet, but I want her protected. If anything happens to me, she'll have the final say. No room for shared nonsense later. I felt my throat tighten. Beneath that, an email from the lawyer replying, fully executed. Recommend opening separate trust or management account in LLC's name. Call if you need help setting it up. I sat there a long time. The silence became a blanket. Then, like muscle memory, I rose. Carried the folder down the stairs, set it on the kitchen counter. Made tea. Called the number on the email. Shelby? The same estate attorney from before. Shelby Adler? How may I help you? This is Marilyn Cordero. We spoke last month about the account audit. I found something. I think I need your eyes on it. An hour later, I was in her office. A clean space with sharp lines, no frills. The kind of place that saw truths, not illusions. She skimmed the documents quickly, her finger tapping as she read. This, she said, is airtight. If anything, it's a quiet fortress. And they don't know? She looked up. Does it matter if they do? Only if I decide to use it. Her expression changed. A respect crept in. Then I suggest we begin drafting a notice of enforcement. Quietly. You can hold it until you're ready? I nodded. Back home, I placed the folder inside my fireproof box. Then I printed a single-sheet title summary. Juniper Hearth LLC Marilyn Cordero sole member dated, notarized, irrevocable. I slid it into a manila envelope, wrote on the front in case they push. Then I tucked it into the drawer with the tea towels. The same drawer Trina always opened when she came over. Sleep refused me. The house ticked with silence. I turned the lights off around 10, brushed my teeth, laid out my robe just like always, but my eyes would not close, not fully, not for long. Instead, I sat up in bed, listening to the second hand of the mantel clock echo through the hallway. 1:04 I rose, padded downstairs. The floor creaked beneath my steps. I made tea out of habit, though I didn't sip it, just held the warmth between my palms, letting the steam kiss my chin. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. It sounded like someone thinking. I sat in Tom's old chair. Leather, cracked at the edges, still faintly smelled of his cologne, a blend of cedar and bergamot. I opened the drawer next to the chair. His notebooks were still there. In the second one, page 12, I found a scribble I must have passed over 100 times. Trust isn't always inherited. Sometimes you build it backward. Through legacy. I ran my finger along the sentence. He wrote that the year Lyle was born. In the same notebook was a list. Cabin repairs. Firewood order. Then set up LLC M the sole member. Don't tell her yet. Let it be a safety net, not a burden. The lump in my throat was familiar now. Grief, yes, but not just grief. Purpose? I opened the next drawer. Letters. Not love letters, exactly. Just notes he left me. One tucked in a book once. Don't forget who you are when they start to erase the edges. I hadn't understood it then. Now I did. At 20:45 a.m., I pulled out a legal pad. I began to write. Not a plan for revenge. A plan for dignity. Steps, quiet ones, legal ones, transfer cabin lease to LLC only agreement. Remove Trina and Landon from any emergency contact, listings. Update pull power of attorney and notarize. Then send early birthday card to Lyle, privately. Include his favorite book. Store title summary in bank lockbox. Each line a tether back to myself. By 40:10 a.m., my handwriting was smaller, neater. I went back upstairs. Not to sleep, but to change. I put on the navy sweater Tom once said made me look like woman who'd command a courtroom. I looked in the mirror. Still me. Only now. There were edges again. I didn't tell anyone. That was the point. In silence, I took back the things they thought were already theirs. The first call went to Shelby. I want to revise every document. No ambiguities. Everything in my voice. Everything clear. Shelby nodded through the screen. This will be precise. The second call was to the credit union. I scheduled a meeting, removed Trina as an emergency contact, revoked all joint access. The teller looked surprised but didn't ask questions. I left with a new card, a new access protocol, and a printed receipt that felt like armor. The third call was to the local nonprofit I had been quietly funding on behalf of Landon's app idea. Please cancel the monthly transfer, effective immediately. They hesitated. But Mrs. Cordero, he said the funds were. They were not. Please send confirmation. I did the same with the auto. Deposit for Trina's online boutique inventory. She had set it up with Tom's blessing, and I had let it run. 600 monthly, then 850, then first and 200. That ended. It took 3 days. Each action felt like turning a key in a locked room I had forgotten I owned. I didn't stop there. I went to the town clerk's office, filed an updated beneficiary list for all utilities, properties, and the LLC. I kept everything in my name. Everywhere I signed my hand steady. I rekeyed the back door, changed the garage code, hired a local tech to install a private camera above the front steps. "You expecting trouble, ma'am?" he asked gently. "Not trouble, just clarity." On the 4th day, I received a voicemail from Trina. "Hey, Marilyn. Weird question, but did something change with the inventory payments? We got a notice. Could just be a glitch. Let me know." I didn't respond. 2 hours later, Landon called. "Mom, just checking in. Everything okay?" "Fine, thank you. Trina says a few things bounced. Did you maybe forget to?" "No." He hesitated. "So you did change something?" I adjusted what needed adjusting. You know, it kind of throws a wrench in what we had planned. "Did you plan with me in mind, Landon, or just around me?" Silence. "Mom, Trina's just trying to manage everything. She feels like you're slipping away." "I'm still here. Just not where you left me." I ended the call before he could fumble another excuse. That night, I watched the sun set from the porch. My tea was warm this time. The air smelled of honeysuckle and old brick. At 9:03 p.m., my phone rang again. "Trina?"
I debated, then picked up.
Marilyn, hi.
"Sorry to bother, just noticed some changes. Wanted to ask if you were okay?" "I'm quite all right." "It's just, we had systems in place. Things set up for stability. Your kind of stability. You sound different." "I am." A long pause. "Should we be worried?" "That depends." "Should I be?" "I don't follow." I took a slow breath. "I've just been thinking," I said, my voice steady, "about what deserves to be quiet and what deserves to be heard." "So, did something happen?" "Yes." "I realize this house doesn't echo because it's empty. It echoes because I used to fill it." More silence. Then finally her voice, "Me can talk. If you want, I'll let you know. For now, I'm enjoying the quiet." I hung up. Then I turned the porch light off, and the world was still. The email came on a Tuesday. Subject: family realignment dinner. Trina loved her euphemisms. The message was cheery, bordering on patronizing. "Let's get on the same page about future plans." RSVP for Thursday evening. Casual, cozy, safe space for ideas. I responded with one word: attending. That Thursday, I wore gray slacks and a navy blouse. No jewelry. Just a leather folder tucked under one arm. Inside the LLC deed, notarized documents, updated POA, and a single-page letter labeled contingency clause. I arrived at 6:55 p.m. Dinner was set on their patio. Twinkle lights. Charcuterie board. 2 bottles of red breathing beside wine glasses engraved with their initials.
Marilyn!
"So glad you came," Trina chirped, air kissing both sides of my face. I nodded. "Of course." Landon looked tense. Lyle waved from inside, his face glued to a tablet. We sat. Trina launched in with practiced charm. "We've been talking to a consultant about intergenerational housing models. Very big in Europe right now." I raised an eyebrow. "Basically," she continued, "we think it could benefit everyone if we streamlined expenses. 1 household, 3 generations, shared equity. You'd have your own wing." "Of course."
Equity?
I echoed. "Just a suggestion. Nothing final. But it would mean we sell your place, combine resources, pay off some of our outstanding business debts. Think of it as a reset." Landon glanced at her, unsure. I said nothing, only adjusted the folder on my lap. She misread the silence. "We just want to ensure you're safe, involved, and not isolated." My eyes flicked to the outdoor speaker, which was playing jazz too softly to be heard clearly. I imagined the same playlist she used at brunch. Background noise for background people. "I brought something," I said quietly. Both heads turned. "Documents," I added. Trina blinked. "Oh, what kind?" "Clarifying kind." I didn't open the folder.
Not yet.
I placed it gently on the table. The air cooled, and I smiled. Trina cleared her throat. "Of course, we'd ensure you have privacy. The northeast wing would be your space. You'd have control over your own schedule." Landon poured himself more wine. His hand trembled slightly. "We just think in the long run, this is what families do. Consolidate. Protect one another. She reached across the table and patted my hand. You've done so much. It's time to let us carry some of it. I let the moment hang, then I opened the folder. One page at a time. No theatrics. Just the sound of paper meeting wood. This, I said softly, is the deed transfer. August 2, 2017, from Tom to Juniper Hearth LLC, sole member? Me. Landon stopped mid-sip. This, I continued, turning the next page, is the letter from our estate lawyer confirming the structure. No shared title. No shared access. Not revocable? Trina's smile faltered. And this? I held up a third page, is the power of attorney revocation notice. Executed last week? You are no longer authorized to act on my behalf in any financial or medical decisions. She pulled her hand back. What is this? Are you saying you don't want to live with us? No, I replied.
I'm saying I don't need to. Silence.
Even the jazz in the background seemed to hush itself. But the house is not yours.
We assumed. Yes.
I gathered the papers back into the folder, smoothed the edges. Assumption is expensive. Landon looked at Trina, then at me. So what now? You just cut us off? No, I said, standing. I just stopped funding your fantasy. I left the folder behind. Let them read it again. Let it sit in their hands. Let them feel, for once, what clarity tastes like. It doesn't shout, it echoes. Trina was the first to break the silence. Marilyn, wait, you're twisting this? We just wanted to help. To create harmony. Her voice wavered, the polished veneer cracking. I turned back calm. Harmony doesn't begin with erasure. It begins with respect. Landon rubbed his temples. Mom, we're family? Yes, I said. And family doesn't celebrate your absence, call you a burden, and sign your name on things you never saw. Trina reached for the folder, flipping through the pages as if sheer will could change ink. This doesn't have to be adversarial. We can negotiate. We can share. You already shared enough of what wasn't yours, I replied. Her jaw tightened. So that's it? You're just walking away. I slipped my coat over my shoulders. No, I'm walking back into my own life. Landon's voice was smaller now. Mom, think about Lyle. That stopped me for a heartbeat. My grandson, the one person who still called late at night, who still drew me into his world with crayons and quiet loyalty. I turned toward the doorway, and there he was. Lyle stood half hidden behind the sliding glass door, tablet clutched to his chest. His eyes darted from his parents to Mead, wide searching. I softened. Hi, sweetheart. He didn't answer, but he nodded once, slowly. He understood more than they realized. Trina followed my gaze. See, this is why we need to unite. For him? For stability. I shook my head. Children don't learn stability from lies. They learn it from truth, even when it hurts. For a long moment, the only sound was the clinking of ice melting in a forgotten glass. Finally, I opened the patio gate. Marilyn. Trina called after me. You can't just shut us out. I paused. I didn't shut you out. You closed the door years ago. I'm just choosing not to knock anymore. And then I walked into the night air. The cool breeze hit my face like a baptism. Crisp. Freeing. Behind me, I heard their voices blur into muffled panic. Chairs scraping. Paper shuffling. But above it all, I caught one last sound. Lyle's voice, soft but steady. Good night, Grandma. I didn't turn, I let the words carry me forward. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it leaves quietly, with the door still swinging on its hinges. The days after the dinner felt different. Not louder, not angrier, just quieter. I expected phone calls, more frantic messages, demands perhaps. But they didn't come. Instead, silence filled the space where their voices used to pester. A silence that, for the first time in years, felt like freedom rather than loneliness. On Sunday, Carol dropped by with muffins. She had heard whispers. Flagstaff was small that way. I bumped into Harold after church, she said, pouring coffee into chip mugs. Word is, people noticed how they treated you. The seating, the way you carried yourself. Harold said you handled it with more class than anyone else at that table. I smiled faintly. Class is cheaper than lawyers. She chuckled. Don't sell yourself short. Sometimes dignity is the sharpest blade. Later that week, I saw Trina at the market. She was by the cheese aisle, sunglasses on though it was overcast. She noticed me, but didn't wave. Her cart was half empty, her pace hurried. Two other women whispered as she passed. The shine on her life, it seemed, was dimming. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice, when clean, doesn't require applause. Meanwhile, Landon stayed silent. No calls, no texts, not even a forwarded photo of Lyle. I thought it might hurt, but it didn't. Not anymore. Distance had already become our normal. This was just the curtain closing. One night, a week later, I heard a knock. Soft, rhythmic. I opened the door to find Lyle, backpack slung, hair messy from wind. "Dad thinks I'm at practice," he whispered. "But I wanted to come here." I stepped aside. "You always have a place here." He pulled out a notebook from his bag. Inside were sketches, trees, mountains, our old cabin. In the corner of one page he had written Juniper Hearth. My chest tightened. "You know about that?" He nodded. "I saw the paper on the table that night." I read the name. I looked it up on Mom's laptop when she wasn't home. "It's yours, isn't it?" "It is." He looked relieved. "Then they can't take it?" "No, they can't." We sat in the living room, the fire low, his notebook between us. "Grandma," he said softly, "I don't like how they talk about you. It feels wrong." I touched his hand. "It's not your fault. You don't need to carry their choices." "But I want to carry something." His eyes were steady, too steady for 12. I exhaled. "Then carry this, the truth that respect matters more than appearances." He nodded again. Wrote it down in the margin of his sketch. The calm that settled after that conversation was unlike any I'd known in years. It wasn't the stillness of being forgotten. It was the peace of being seen. Weeks passed. My routine shifted gently. Mornings with tea, afternoons tending the small garden Tom once started. Lyle came by often, sometimes with homework, sometimes just with silence he wanted to share. Neighbors began stopping me more. "We saw how strong you were," one said. It was inspiring. I thanked them, though I didn't feel heroic. I only felt intact. As for Trina and Landon, their silence continued. The whispers around town grew, though not from me. People notice patterns. They notice arrogance. They notice when kindness is absent. And slowly, the stage they had built for themselves began to collapse. By midsummer, I received an email from a mutual friend of Tom's. "He'd be proud of how you handled it," the note read. Simple, direct, enough. On the first cool evening of September, Lyle and I sat on the porch steps. The sun dipped behind the pines. He handed me another sketch, a small house, smoke rising from its chimney, 2 figures inside. "That's us," he said. I looked at him, at the steadiness he carried despite the storm around him. "Yes," I whispered. "That's us." The fallout had come, not in fire, not in chaos, but in calm, and in that calm I was no longer erased. I was alive. The last morning I spent in the Juniper Lane house was golden. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, catching dust motes in a slow dance. I had packed nearly everything, but left one thing on purpose, Tom's old mug, the one with the chipped rim and the faded sketch of mountains. I poured tea into it, held it in both hands, let the steam rise into my face, then I placed it gently on the counter. "Goodbye," I whispered. By noon, the movers were gone, and I locked the door behind me for the final time. The keys felt heavy in my palm. But when I dropped them into the envelope for the new owners, the weight lifted. The house wasn't mine to guard anymore. What mattered, I carried with me. The new place wasn't grand. A smaller house, closer to town. 2 bedrooms, wide porch, bright light in the afternoons. Enough space for me, for my art supplies, and for Lyle when he visited. More importantly, it came with room to breathe. That week, I met with Shelby again. We finalized the transfer of funds into the Juniper Hearth Scholarship. Its mission: to provide art grants for students in northern Arizona whose families couldn't afford supplies or tuition. The first award would bear Tom's name. When I signed the founding documents, my hand didn't shake. That evening, I told Lyle, we sat at the kitchen table in the new house, surrounded by unpacked boxes. "A scholarship?" he asked, eyes wide. "Yes, for kids who need someone to believe in them. Just like your grandfather believed in me," he grinned. "Can I help?" "You already are." "You're the reason I remembered what mattered." He scribbled something in his sketchbook, then turned it toward me. It was a drawing of a treehouse. 2 stick figures inside, smiling. He had written above it Juniper Hearth Club. I laughed. "Looks perfect." For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt etched, into memory, into legacy, into the future, and the quiet around me wasn't empty anymore. It was full. The new porch became my favorite place. By October, pots of marigolds lined the steps, their orange faces bright against the cooling air. Neighbors waved when they walked past. A few stopped to ask about the sign I had hung juniper hearth art circle. It wasn't a business. It wasn't grand. Just a weekly gathering in my living room for kids who needed space to create. I supplied paper, brushes, colors. They supplied laughter. The first meeting was small, 3 children from the neighborhood and Lyle. He sat closest to me, his sketchbook open, pencil moving quickly. "Grandma," he whispered as the others painted, "this feels right?" I nodded. "It does." The house filled with the sound of brushes swishing, chairs scraping, young voices spilling ideas. The quiet that once pressed on me now carried a new kind of weight. Full, alive, chosen. When the session ended, one girl hugged her painting to her chest and said, "I've never had my own paints before." I had to look away, my throat tight. Later that evening, I sat with Lyle on the porch swing. He showed me his drawing. A sun breaking through dark clouds, rays spreading wide. "What do you think?" he asked. I studied it for a long moment. "I think you captured how healing feels." He leaned against me. "You're not invisible anymore, Grandma." Tears filled my eyes. Not sad tears. The kind that clear the view. I looked out at the marigolds, the street beyond, the horizon stretching quiet and endless. For the first time, I wasn't surviving. I was living. Peace without apology, legacy without compromise, and love without conditions. If you've ever felt erased or silenced or treated as less in your own family, know this: your story matters. Share your story. You're not alone.